Magandang gabi po sa ating lahat. We would like to welcome you once again sa ating ISIP-ISAK Conversations on Faith and Society. Ngayon pong gabi, maganda po at exciting ang ating talakayan because we have si Manong Frankie, Sionil Jose, siyang nasaksihan no? Sa mga epochal moments ng ating bansa. So maganda na makinig tayo sa kanya, yung kanyang mga personal na mga reflections tungkol sa mga dinaanan natin na historical memories natin, no? At paano to dapat tingnan, lalo na yung tanong na bakit po kang unfinished itong ating mga revolusyon? Maganda pong tanongin siya at ano ang take niya sa ating kasaysayan tungkol dito. So, Marie?
Yes, Dr. Melba, magandang gabi po. At muli pinahaabot namin nila Kuya Jane yung paumanhin namin sa aming mga viewers sa aming technical difficulty. Pero katulad nga lang nasabi ni Ate Melba, we will continue with our discussion tonight, no? I was just saying kanina, hindi nyo naririnig, that our guest cuts across all generations. Kasi kahit yung mga kaedad ko na mas bata have emailed me and told me how excited they are to hear and learn from our special guest ngayong gabi. Ang ating pong guest ay batang-bata pa. He is already in his 90s. Ayan. And one of the most widely read Filipino writers. No po? His novels are and even short stories depict social underpinning ng class struggles and colonialism sa ating society. Ang kanya pong mga isinulat ay na-translate na sa Korean, Indonesian, Czech, Russian, Latvian, Ukrainian, at Dutch. So marami nang nakabasa ng kanyang mga kwento at nobela. Sige po, hindi ko na patatagalin. Let's all welcome mga kasama namin dito sa ISIP-ISAK. Our national artist for literature, Dr. or Sir Francisco Sionil Jose o Manong Frankie sa kanyang mga kaibigan. Magandang gabi po, Manong Frankie.
Maraming salamat for your introduction. I am 96 years old. See? And of late, I've been thinking about us as a people, our convoluted history. And first, let me go to the very beginning. The two great religions of Asia, Buddhism and Hinduism, never really reached us. Bago dumating mga Kastila rito, we were, as we are now, several islands and several tribes fighting one another. Ang nangyari is that whether we like it or not, the Spaniards gave us our nationhood, defined our national region or geography, and the most important thing is that they Christianized us. And whether we like it or not, because of that, we belong to the Western tradition. That is the core of our identity. We are Asian, yet we belong to the Western tradition. And our political institutions, which we inherited from the West, are very, very weak. Kahit na we were 500 years under Spain and 40 years in the United States, these institutions are easily sundered. And we must remember that institutions are only as strong as the men who make them. If we belong to the Western tradition, that means that many of the values of Western society were our legacy. We inherited them. We inherited them. These values, in many ways, are universal, but also in the sense they are quite different from those who belong to the Eastern tradition. But above all this, we are Asians, we are a young country, and we are trying to develop a nation up to now. I have Japanese friends who have been observing us academically all their lives, and one of our favorite subject of discussion is what is a nation. And of course, we all know Japan is a nation. And so I asked them, what do you think of us now, Filipinos? And they said, well, they said, you are going there. And, and that is what I would like to talk about today. This going there, this reach for nationhood, not so much expressed by nationalist symbols, but the most important thing is that society we are building a just society, because justice in the long run is the foundation of any society, whether Asian or Western, that will endure. The idea of justice is inherent to man, but more so, it was understood clearly by the Filipinos who were westernized by Spain. This includes, most of all, Rizal, the Ilustrados, the revolutionary clergy, and the peasantry personified by Bonifacio, who were the first to mount a revolution against Western imperialism in our part of the world. That revolution that Bonifacio started, although it wasn't very clearly pronounced, already had social underpinnings. The gulf between the very rich and the very poor. Aguinaldo was a rich Cavite landlord. Bonifacio wasn't poor, but he was educated. But he represented the proletariat. Unfortunately, unfortunately, his revolution was aborted when he was killed in Tijeros. And Aguinaldo, who led the revolution, succumbed to the Spanish bribery at the Pack of Biak na Batu. As we all know from our history, Aguinaldo returned, hoodwinked by the Americans to restart the revolution. And again, he failed and was eventually betrayed by the Maccabees in Palanan. So, in a sense, that revolution that our leaders started in 1896 is really incomplete in the sense that it hasn't liberated our very poor, although it may have established a sovereign state. That state has not proven effective in the grant of justice to Filipinos, as we can see today for all the skyscrapers that now define Manila's skyline. Poverty is widespread. Many Filipinos eat only once a day, and this in itself represents the injustice which only revolution can stop or redeem. So the question arises, is revolution still necessary? I have always believed that it is still necessary, but the weapons have changed. They have changed tremendously because through the years, for all the weaknesses of all our political institutions, they have also been the very engines for change. If we were oppressed by a foreign ruler, our enemy now is our own elite, the Filipino oligarchy that has profited from stability, that has profited from colonialism, is now the major obstacle to the development of this country because it also controls the political system that assures us political and social mobility. I had hoped that this oligarchy will change, but in the last 3 generations, it has not. All you have to do is look at how it has used its power. Sure, Mr. Duterte has done a lot of improvements in this country, but he has not really destroyed the oligarchy. And I think that he has also created his own. Now, when I say the weapons have changed, all over Asia, we have seen how several poor countries have modernized without the violence of a revolutionary proletariat. There is Singapore there, there's Korea, there's Taiwan, you know. Most of all, there's Japan, and even the United States. The modernization of the United States after the American Revolution was brought about by the robber barons, who raped the land, but they established universities, factories, railroads, philanthropy. This is what I hope, I had hoped our oligarchy will be, that they will be nation builders, but they are not. Look at their investments. condominiums, fancy resorts, you know, shopping malls, all of which are not productive. How do we revolutionize this country then? If we are as brave as the men who joined the Katipunan, we will realize that every election time, if we use our minds, it is with the ballot, not with the bullet, that we can change this society. But above all, you know, as I said, even if this revolution succeeds, we still have to work hard to make our institutions endure. And we can only do that if we are, and this is very important, a moral people. A people who believe that God created in us a free will as a heart that is compassionate and a mindset that is dedicated to the building of a just and prosperous Filipino nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Manong Frankie. Um, you covered quite a great deal in your talk. In a bit, we are now gathering some questions from our audience via Facebook Live, and I'm seeing some of them now. But let's kick off our conversation, Manong Frankie, maybe by asking you this question. You're obviously making a point that this revolution is unfinished precisely because
Speak um, slowly and louder.
oh, I'm sorry. Sige po. So you're making this point that the revolution is still unfinished because the oligarchy is still present. And you spoke about justice and the pursuit of a just society. I wonder, Manong Frankie, what does this revolution against the oligarchy look like? What does this revolution against the oligarchy look like? And in your experience as a man who has seen many things, was there any attempt to arrest this oligarchy?
Number one, you know, when ABS-CBN was toppled, you know, that is an example of how a an activist government, you know. But hanggang doon na lang. How about the others? You know, how about the other very powerful Filipinos? All you have to do is look at power. Where does that power reside? The people who have the money. Okay? But government has a power too, you know. And as was proven by Congress, elected by the people, when it refused to grant ABS-CBN, you know, a franchise. That's one. Magsaysay was very, very correct. I knew the man very well. His his purpose was to set up an incorruptible government. That is the primary objective of a people's revolution. to set up an incorruptible government which will then impose the sanctions, against the wealthy, tax them, that's one, you know. Or on the other hand also, convince them to engage in productive industries, to help modernize the country, establish uh, uh, a system whereby the people get educated and thoroughly absorbed into the workforce. And, and of course, provide the social services that all just societies have. But the oligarchy hasn't done this. Go ahead.
Yeah, Manong Frankie, we have a follow-up question there. No, um, again, we're asking you to recount your stories. Somebody who has gone through the 20th century, the long 20th century. One question that we're picking up from the audience is this: in your view, why has there been why was power? I mean, you're talking about power. Why was power transferred only from one oligarchy to another? It
But
was
precisely that's it. A revolution means the transfer of power from the oppressed. You elect a good leader and you can see dramatic changes. Look at this happening in Manila with the election of Isko Dumagoso.
hmm,
Yeah. So that is why the ballot is very important, you know, because you can have changes in a democratic system. Yeah.
hmm,
Oh, I'm not saying that it's the only way. Korea modernized with the dictatorship. Japan modernized, with the Meiji Restoration. Lee Kuan Yew modernized with a very, very strong government. So you need a very, very strong government. You need a very, very strong government that is socially responsive. You need selfless leaders who do not think of their pockets first or their personal agendas, but who think of the general welfare. Selfless leaders, you know, who can fully identify themselves with the greatest problem that the society faces, and that problem is poverty. Right here, poverty is our greatest problem. you know, and it is aggravated by this pandemic.
hmm. We're going to read some comments now. Marie?
Pardon?
Yes. We're now going to read some comments po.
Oh, good,
Our
good.
viewers, yes, our viewers are very active on Facebook and meron silang mga messages na ipinapahatid po sa inyo. Una na po from Sir Arthur Alvendia. Ang sabi po niya, we live in a borrowed and neo-colonized culture. Institutional systems, beliefs, values, philosophies, spirituality. We have yet to integrate, synthesize, and create our own collective self as a nation. I believe Mr. Sionil is a rare voice reminding us that so-called political independence does not guarantee true freedom and has not yet evolved the Filipino mind and spirit to create his path to nationhood. It echoes yung sinabi po ng mga kaibigan ninyo, the comment of your Japanese friends that we are not yet a nation, but they feel like we are going there. One more comment. I'd like to read one more comment from Kawili Boyson Villarama. Ang sabi po niya, all countries are divided between the poor and the rich, the black-skinned and the white ones, the graduates of private schools and public schools, and so forth. True democracy is heaven where God reigns. Democracy can happen when the poor is part of nation building and given equal seats in Congress. Like what you have said, Manong Frankie, it's ballots and not bullets for us. May I ask you po, ano po, follow-up question lang. I think um, what you shared a while ago is quite medyo poignant sa akin yon bilang isang batang Pilipino that we are still on our way to really defining our nationhood. Sa inyo po, Manong Frankie, what will really make us a true nation? You have mentioned about putting leaders who are just and moral. You have mentioned about making sure that there is political and social mobility. But what will really make us a nation? Ano pa po ang nakikita ninyo or characteristics na dapat meron tayo para maging ganap na bayan na tayong mga Pilipino?
Okay. First, first, let me define the democracy in its most basic form. Democracy is in the stomach. When the jeepney driver can eat the same food that is served in the richest uh, homes in this country, in the same manner that the taxi driver in Washington can eat the same steak that is served in the White House. Yun, that is the ultimate measure of democracy. Now, Filipino nationhood. Remember that we are a very young country. You know, in terms of independence, wala pa tayong 100 years, you know. In terms of Christianization, oh, 400 years. You compare that with the civilizations around us, you know, China, 5,000 years, India, you know. So, in a sense, their sense of identity is already well molded, you know. They are sure, they are sure of what they are, you know. There is Chinese architecture, Indian music, Chinese literature, Japanese architecture. We have Philippine literature now. We have Philippine music, but it is hard to define what is Philippine architecture or Philippine art as a whole. I would like a situation where at one time, you know, you can say that is Filipino, you know. But again, I go back to what I said that that Filipino-ness, that Filipino-ness should be translated and taken away from all these very, very obvious and shallow symbols of nationhood. Above all, that Filipino-ness should illustrate that the Filipino has created for himself a very just and sovereign nation, both just and sovereign. See? And to do that, I don't know how long it will take, but I'm glad to tell you, as my Japanese friends have told me, we are on the way.
Hmm.
Remember, Japanese is not only prosperous. No, Japan is not only prosperous. Japan is also a very moral and, in a sense, a very just society. I mean, there is the underside of Japanese society. Sure, all societies have an underside. But on the whole, when people are able to eat, as I said, the same food that the rulers eat, then you have a just society.
Very well said. It reminds me po of a meme that I've seen on Facebook that says, Manong Frankie, a true progressive nation is where the rich can take the public transport. Transport. It's not where there are many cars, but it's where there is equity and there is a just life, as what we have said. Maraming salamat po, Kuya Jay.
Yeah, this is, you know, hearing Manong Frankie talk about justice and all that. reminds me of really, I suppose, the struggle of every Filipino.
Mhm.
Manong Frankie, siguro as we wind down, in your again, we want to pick your brain and tap into your very long experience. Sa karanasan po ninyo, Manong Frankie, um, how have Filipinos over time, and if you could remind us of some important historical moments, that would be good. How have Filipinos attempted to create a just society, especially in this long 20th century? And you have witnessed a lot. I ask this because many in the audience are young people, and it would be here to hear from somebody like you. Recount some of these historical moments.
That aspiration
Hmm.
to create a just society is as ancient as man himself. You see it in the tradition of the ancient Greeks, Even in tribal societies, there is always a form of government, of law and order, taboos, that are followed, because they want such such tribal societies also to have a sense of security and peace. So the hankering for justice is as ancient as man himself. It's the same with the hankering for truth. The great philosophers, that what was they have done all their life to search for truth. But truth is not an abstraction. Remember that. Truth is never an abstraction. Truth becomes justice in action. You follow? Or it is not truth at all. See? And those who seek the truth and write about the truth, whether they mean it or not, they expose the lies, the hypocrisies of any society too. And that is why it is always important for people to seek the truth and recognize it when it is said. You know. Okay?
Yes po. Maraming salamat, Manong Frankie. I'm just taking a step back. I'm still ruminating, no? Iniisip ko pa po what you said about Filipino-ness, and I'm actually chatting with your good friend,
About Philippine what?
Filipino-ness.
Oh.
Yes, and I'm chatting with your good friend, Ma'am Alma Cruz Miklat. Ayan, who fondly calls you Manong Frankie also. And you mentioned about how our culture and art is a barometer to show how solid we are as a nation. Ano po? And now you're talking about truth, and I just am thinking how much of our art and our culture really champions truth. I think that's key to a true nation, no? That it's a nation of truth. Um, I just have to indulge this question because our viewers, most of them are faith-based. They are from faith-based groups and mga mananampalataya po, people of faith. I just want to ask, Manong Frankie, uh, how can the church help in forging this national identity? How can the Filipino church help in moving our nation towards having our own identity, being that Filipino or having that Filipino-ness in the church. I hope you don't feel like I'm asking you to be a theologian, but I really just am curious to hear your observation. It's not every time that I get to talk to someone of your age na super sharp pa rin po. So I want to hear your opinion on that. How can the church contribute to forging that national identity?
That's a very broad question, but let me answer you in terms of my own feelings, my own experience.
Yes, sir.
I'm not a very pious individual. I don't go to church at all, except perhaps when my wife drags me on my birthday. But I'm a very religious person. One must make a distinction between a religious person and a pious person. My belief in God is unshaken kahit nung maliit pa ako. You know, I don't see how anyone can be an atheist when, as I said, even just looking at a leaf, you know, how did that come to be? Lalo na when you are greeted by a beautiful sunrise, you know. So I don't bother so much with these religiosity questions, you know, because I am a firm believer in God. But that belief must be substantiated, you know, by other things other than believing, you know. And this where this is where the church comes in when it presents us uh, with instructions on how to live a life that is meaningful. Okay? Because bandang huli, that is the basic question that we ask ourselves. What is the meaning of life? And I've come to believe that life is a gift from God that has no meaning. It is up for the individual to give it meaning, to see to it that his life is not just his life, but that it is shared by others. You know, Hemingway wrote a beautiful novel called For Whom the Bell Tolls. And that novel is prefaced by a poem by John Donne that when the bell tolls, it's not just for one who is the who died, but it tolls for all mankind. You follow? So, in the sense, you know, if people want to give their lives meaning, it's up to them whether they want to be crooks or they want to be of service to other people. And usually, that is why so many of our leaders think that their legacy are monuments. And this goes back to the ancient world when great leaders built massive monuments so that they will be remembered, you know. But what are monuments for if they were built by tyrants, you know? So again, you come to that basic question, which I hope all of us will be able to answer. What is the meaning of my life? What is it for? And, okay.
Thank you po. Thank you po. One thing that I'm picking up is a substantial faith, a meaningful life. And I pray that the church will really move us to that, and also yung truth, ano? That the church will really be the truth. Manong Frankie, meron kang fan dito who is one of your perhaps younger fan kasi kakilala ko ito. She's just a millennial, and I just want to share the quote, no, from your book, Poon, no? And she's quoting you. She says here from your book, there was no measure for love of country except in sacrifice. And why ask the poor for more sacrifices? It was the comfortable, the rich who should express it with their wealth. The poor had only their lives to give. So I hope that the church who is listening today will have this resonate sa kanilang isip from Manong Frankie's book Poon. Kuya Jay, we are winding down, and anything you'd like to share pa po, Kuya Jay?
No, we're just very thankful to Manong Frankie for the privilege of listening to you. Even though we had technical difficulties, you still managed to pull through. So thank you very much, Manong Frankie. Please stay strong. We're now going to turn over the time to Ate Melba, who will provide us some final reflections.
Yes.
Ate Melba?
Salamat po, Manong Frankie. Salamat po sa mga thoughtful na reflections ninyo na iniiwan sa amin this night. I just want to siguro surface some of the themes na nailabas ng Manong Frankie. Number one is yung issue ng bakit palaging itong ating mga revolusyon is really just a transfer of power from one class of oppressor to another. No? Siguro magandang tanungin yan. From a theological point of view, we are saying na ang revolusyon ng that transfers power from one class to another is not enough. It's part of the Christian tradition to say that there should also be a revolution of the heart. In other words, magiging oppressor din yung susunod. No, kagaya ng Chinese Communist Party ngayon, of course, you have to hand it to them. Meron silang nagawa economically, etc., because of the severe social control. Pero at the same time, pag tinitingnan mo yung cost na, yung Cultural Revolution, yung millions na namatay, ng mga panahon na yun, you sort of ask, yung economic na gain, is it worth all the sacrifices ng kanilang citizenry? No, hindi natin masyadong nagagrasp yun kasi insulated sila for many years. Ngayon lang lumalabas. Nakikita natin yan dun sa 1 million or so na mga Xinjiang na mga Uyghurs, no? Na virtually they are being herded together. And yung brainwashed and so on. So kita natin yung ganong massive na cruelty side by side with yung China's rise to power, no? So we need to ask ourselves, asan yung values natin as Christians, no? So isang tanong din yon. And yung from a sociological as well as anthropological na point of view, siguro we need to understand na merong cultural divide sa ating society. Unlike halimbawa yung China or Singapore or Korea or even Indonesia, no? Yung mga elite nila, yung mga oligarchy nila, kahit na they rob also their own people, no? They rob them blind. Sa totoo lang, they are part of the cultural self-identity. Yung sinasabi ni Art kanina, no? So, problema natin, wala tayong national identity. Sila, culturally, meron silang sympathy sa mga masa nila. In other words, like si Suharto. Si Suharto will face the music. Hindi siya pupunta sa Europe o sa Amerika, no? But dahil siya ay Javanese na mystic, he is very rooted among his people. Ganon din si Park Chung-hee, ganon din yung ibang mga... In other words, hindi sila pupunta kung saan, sa Spain o kaya sa Amerika, no? But they will stay in their own country. Kahit na nagnanakaw din sila, pero yung pera na yun umiikot sa ekonomiya. Hindi lumalabas sa Switzerland or sa Netherlands, Antilles, or whatever. So makikita po natin na walang ganong collective sense ng sympathy and identity dun sa oligarchy as well as dito sa masa. Yun yung tinatawag ng mga cultural natin, na merong cultural divide talaga. You're looking always to outside, no? Yung mga colonial overlords, doon ka accountable, hindi to your own people. At ito, I think, ang diferensya ng ating oligarchy, ng mga elite classes natin, as against the rest of what we see sa Asia. Na kahit papano, ina-appear naman nila yung citizens nila, pero at least, no, meron silang ganong push for their own national progress, no, yung mga ganyan. And also siguro yung, I remember somebody telling me na we should realize na itong mga decolonized countries like us, no, you also have, you only have what, mga 50 years, no? I think we need to remember na yung issue ng nationhood, yung evolution ng national identity as well as yung sinasabi ng nation state. It took 5 centuries for Europe, no? Nag-umpisa yung idea ng city-state doon sa 13th century Florence and other Italian na cities, no? In other words, nagkaroon sila ng sense ng nation noong 19th century na, panahon nila Bismarck. So, at the same time, itong ating mga decolonized countries, we are asking them to do in 50 years what Europe took 500 years. At kahit ang Japan, isipin natin, mga warring shogunates din naman yan. Ang China, it's the same, no? Yung mga warring na shogunates, umangyat lang yan nung panahon ng Meiji Restoration. Sinasabi ni Kuya, ni Manong Frankie. Nag-consolidate sila. They had centuries to consolidate yung kanilang kultura. Magkaroon sila ng sense ng national unity after the shogunates. So, ang problema, yung mga decolonized countries natin, yung sinasabi ni Kuya Frankie na very young in the sense na yung genuine na political independence, 50 years lang, or not even, kagaya natin, hindi naman tayo ganun ka-politically independent. We're always thinking CIA, yung Amerika, etc. O ngayon yung China, no? In other words, wala pa tayong sense talaga na nag-i-evolve pa yung idea that we are identity, you know, we have an identity and we have a national state, no? So isa yon na siguro dapat pag-isipan natin paano mangyayari yun as Christians, no? Pangatlo, siguro yung issue ng maganda yung sabi ni Kuya Frankie about yung democracy, ang tunay. Totoo yun na dapat yung kinakain ng mga mahihirap, hindi lang kinakain ng mga nasa elite, ano? And that's a good indicator ng equality sa isang society. Yung mga basics are at least covered, kagaya ng pagkain. Now, in scripture, si Manong Frankie has talked about yung need for morals sa society. Ano? I think ito ang medyo underestimated ng mga social scientists. We do not think that this is so important, no? When we think about social forces, we think about class lines, we think about... Pero hindi natin pag-iisipan, ano yung fallout sa atin pagka ang ating mga leaders immoral. Corruption, no? I mean, you can be very committed, very talented, etc., very competent, pero competent din sa badness, no? Nakita na natin to, kaya ang ating mga masang Pilipino mas bumoto sa kagaya ni Duterte or somebody na at least posing as a populist. Although post lang naman yun, hindi naman totoo, no? He looks at the poor as a scum to be eliminated, no? Para mga insekto that needs to be exterminated. In spite of his, posturing na siya, populist. Pero ang dapat na maintindihan natin dito, pag tinanggal mo yung morals, no? Sa isang tao or isang society, kaya yung corruption tataas, yung lahat tataas. And hindi pa yan, ang mga social scientists have to take seriously the fact na no society will survive without a minimum moral sense. Kaya maganda yung sinasabi ni Manong Frankie. Now, we need to have morals din, yung element ng morals in society. You need a minimum moral sense. Kasi yung competence is not enough. Ang character is really what makes, kasi yung kahit yung sinasabi na political will, ang political will can be directed to bad things. I can be very strong, no? Kamay na bakal, but yung kamay na yan can be what? Used to squash dissent. It can be used, kagaya ni Marcos, can be used to, exterminate itong mga drug addicts, etc. So in other words, siguro we need to hear a little bit more, no? Yung idea na morals have to be at the center of our vision when we are thinking paano gagawin ito. And unfortunately, ang church has not even begun to think about this. How do we make our laws enforceable simply because merong ganong moral sense, right and wrong ang mga tao? I think ultimately, ang real separation, ang real divide sa society, no? Meron kang cultural divide, may social divide, may economic. But more than this actually is the divide between those who are on the side of the good and those on the side of evil. It doesn't matter kung ikaw ay what, pulahan, dilawan, o kaya DDS, whatever. What really separates people is really whether you're on the side, tatayo ka rin sa what is moral, what is good, at tatayuan mo yung evil, no? And you will do everything. So, I think yung church has to start articulating this. Now, we need to take seriously itong morals in our political life. Kasi dun, saan pa manggagaling yan? Yung mga values, kundi sa atin din, sa simbahan. Unfortunately, ang simbahan is just as powerless, no? There are lots of people, mga politicians ngayon who become born again, who become very religious. Sabi nga ni Manong Frankie. And yet, ang behavior nila has not changed towards justice. It has not changed towards social righteousness. No? Nagnanakaw din. Namumuliti ka rin, for their own ambitions, etc. So, parang walang power yung pagka-born again. Sa totoo lang. Pagka meron ako narinig ngayon na ito raw so and so, si Senator ganyan, naging Christian, naging born again. I would like to see a good indicator biblically of what it means to be born again. Si Zacchaeus. No? In other words, I would like to see all these wealthy na mga nagiging born again. To give, kagaya ni Zacchaeus, to give back, ano man yung ninakaw nila, no? Restore it fourfold. No? And even give half of whatever they have to the poor. Yun eh. We would like to see isang indicator ng genuineness ng pagka-born again. Itong mga magsasabi ng mga religious ngayon. I want to see that. Are they prepared to do what Zacchaeus did? To restore fourfold yung mga nanakaw nila. At hindi lang yan, to give away half of their wealth. No? So, kailangan siguro yung sinasabi nga na sacrifice. Ito ang gusto nating makita doon sa mga mga nandoon sa kwan. Because people keep asking me, ano ibig sabihin when the kingdom comes? When yung tunay na paghahari ng Diyos ay dumating na. Ang isang indicator niyan, yung sinasabi sa Magnificat. No? Sabi sa Magnificat, when the king comes, no? There will be what? Lifting up of the lowly, no? And the overthrow of the mighty. There will be the feeding of the hungry and the sending away of the rich empty. Tayong mga nasa humanitarian organizations, gusto natin yung feeding the poor, no? Feeding the hungry. But we do not like yung, ayaw nating marinig yung sending away of the rich empty. In other words, yung very intentional restructuring ng social order in such a way na mas maraming napupunta sa mga mahihirap, no? At yung mga mayayaman nagkakaroon ng downward social mobility. Maraming mga tunay na Kristiyano, kahit na mga very rich sila, eventually nagkakaroon ng downward mobility. Bakit? Because nire-redress natin yung social imbalance. Yun ang isang indication that the kingdom is at work among us. The true religion actually lifts the lowly and feeds the hungry. So, kailangan pong magandang reminder sa atin yan. Ano? Si Manong Frankie has spent his life writing about our social problems. No? Makita mo yan sa mga nobela niya. And I think it's important siguro na marinig natin again and again what it means to put at the center of our vision the poor. Unfortunately, yung mga Marxist ang palaging may ganyang rhetoric, ano? I don't hear that very much sa mga Kristiyano. That we must put the poor at the center of our vision as a country, as a nation. So, siguro po, talagang we can pray and work towards a true democracy. Yung sinasabi ni Manong Frankie na this democracy of the stomach, no? Na may pagkain ang bawat isa na pare-pareho. So, yung issue ng oligarchy, siguro yung mga social scientists among us should start thinking how to break yung cultural divide, how to make yung oligarchy, kung pwede, born again. Kasi ako naniniwala ako sa revolution of the heart. Pag ang isang tao ay tunay na lumapit kay Kristo, kagaya ni Zacchaeus, meron niyang social and economic consequences. Pag walang social and economic consequences, baka hindi tunay yung conversion. Pero ako naniniwala na kapag tunay ang conversion, merong ganong revolution sa ating mga puso, revolution of the heart. Then hopefully, we will see lots of our wealthy people, members of the oligarchy, getting to have a social conscience and responsibility. Siguro ito po ang dapat ipag-pray natin as a church community. So yun lamang po at salamat kay Manong Frankie for his thoughts for us tonight.